What's up, everyone? I'm Jared Harris, and you're listening to episode 25 of Beats by Jer. On May 7th, I had the absolute pleasure of catching Kamasi Washington at Toronto's History as the band embarked on their Fearless Movement tour in celebration of their most recent album of the same name. I want to give a massive shout out to the Spill Magazine, History, and Live Nation for providing the media pass for this show. It goes without saying that I am always incredibly appreciative of the opportunities to see more music because of the incredible teams that I work with and the courtesy that is extended through Live Nation and other promoters. Over the years, I've had the privilege of seeing so many artists that I never would have seen, artists that have surprised me, artists that have caught me off guard. And Kamasi Washington is not an artist that necessarily caught me off guard. I knew it was going to be incredible. I just didn't know exactly how incredible this performance was going to be. Dare I say, it was one of the greatest musical experiences that I've ever seen. It was absolutely incredible. And if you have the chance to see Kamasi Washington and his band, his phenomenal band, do so without hesitation. Fearless Movement is Kamasi's third full-length studio album and continues to see him and his band expand the possibilities of not only jazz but popular music. Their creativity is unprecedented and is supported by an equal degree of musicianship and performative power. Without a moment of weakness, Fearless Movement seeks to reconcile the disparity between the creative spirit and the body as the next evolution of Washington's artistry. Fearless Movement is a transformative collection of music that transcends expectations on all fronts. Truly, to watch Washington continue to demonstrate an unrivaled level of creativity, an unparalleled level of musicality as a songwriter, a band leader, and a performer is exhilarating. In addition to being a thrilling musical experience, Washington's latest album should be regarded as one of the most important contributions to the progress and preservation of jazz in today's modern era. Their concert served as an exceptional extension to the album. Choosing to perform exclusively their new material, the band consisted of trombonist Ryan Porter, DJ Battlecat, drummer Tony Austin, bassist Miles Mosley, pianist Brandon Coleman, vocalist Patrice Quinn, and Washington's father, Ricky Washington, on flute. In the spirit of jazz, most of the set was improvised, masterfully so. It was like watching Stevie Wonder. There was an unparalleled amount of joy on stage. Joy for the sake of creativity, joy for the sake of music, joy for the sake of expression. Washington and his band performed for the love and service to music and a greater sense of creative expression, creative connection, something which only enriches their performance. Truly, this was one of the greatest musical experiences I have seen. After the performance, I connected with drummer Tony Austin. Much like Kamasi and many members of his current band, Tony has his roots in the mythical West Coast Get Down, a Los Angeles-based jazz collective that honed some of the most innovative musicians of our time. As a session artist, Tony has recorded and performed with the likes of Lauryn Hill, Carlos Santana, Robbie Krieger, India Ari, and more recently, Willa Smith, Gwen Stefani, Patti LaBelle, and Dave Chappelle. In addition to this, Tony has performed on and engineered all of Kamasi's releases since his 2015 breakthrough album, including his most recent, Fearless Movement. Here is my conversation with Tony Austin. Welcome, Tony Austin. Thank you for joining me today on Beats by Jer.
Sweet, man. Thanks for having me.
Very excited to talk to you. Like I was telling you, I watched you perform with Kamasi Washington just a couple of weeks ago on the Fearless Movement tour. Completely astounded by your performance, the performance of the band, but as a drummer, just listening to you was exceptional.
Thanks, man.
Let's start with your roots. When did you start drumming? Who did you study with? Where did you study with? What was that all like?
Oh boy. I started drumming pretty much as early as I can remember, probably around 2 or 3 years old. My dad was a drummer, and he was doing gigs and stuff. And I think just, I was around a lot of musicians, and my mom even though she wasn't active at the time, she studied flute, and so there was always a lot of musicians around the house. So it was just something that like I kind of was born into. I didn't really resist it at all, so it just felt right. So it was almost like it was in my genes. So I started, you know, playing drums. Some of my earliest memories, and I think when I was 5, you know, even though as sort of young of a mind as I had, I like made a conscious decision. I was like, I'm gonna be a drummer. I'm gonna really like start, practicing and working hard to learn really how to play this instrument and how to be expressive on it. So I was pretty much like pretty serious about it since 5 years old. Started taking lessons when I was 7. Um, at the time in my neighborhood, I grew up in Los Angeles, but in the area of Los Angeles called the Valley, Sherman Oaks. And, you know, my mom, my dad was really busy and like they kind of separated. So my mom didn't know anything about drums or like where to find a drum instructor. So she kind of just looked in the paper and like saw this one place called the Percussion Academy in Van Nuys. And I went, and turned out it was more of like a classical percussion thing. So I learned how to read music. I learned how to play vibraphones and timpanis and suspended snare drum and bass drums and all the instruments in the percussion family. And then kind of like practiced drums on the side because he didn't really like he played drums, but he wasn't like a proficient drum teacher. But he definitely showed me my rudiments and told me how to show me how to properly hold a stick and like gave me all of the basic um, physical abilities to play what it is that I want. And by the time I got on the drum set, I already had this urge to play whatever I was listening to on the radio or whatever was hot. Back in shit, the early '80s. And then he started a drum corps or a drum line rather, and we started marching. So I marched through my whole teenage years. It was like serious drumline. Like some of the instructors that were in there were instructors for the Blue Devils. So
Oh,
basically, drumline is like it's like drum and bugle corps, but just without the bugles. So we had a pit orchestra. We had full battery with marching snare, marching bass drum, and marching quintets or quads. And we did movements and marched and we had a little bit of a color guard, marching suspended cymbal or marching cymbals. And we competed on in DCI and DCI competitions, and it was like really serious. So they brought like that serious sort of Blue Devils attitude, where like if you messed up a part, you had to do push-ups. And like one time I was late to rehearsal, so I had to like and our rehearsals were long. We rehearsed for like 10 hours sometimes. One time I was late, and so they made me stand outside with the bass drum over my head for 2 hours. I'm like 12, 13 years old, man. It's stuff you can't do now, but it definitely like instilled a work ethic in me and sort of a diligence to practice and get good and take this serious. If I wanted, I could have quit. I can be like, oh, this is too much. I don't want to hold this bass drum over my head again for 2 hours. But I kind of saw it as a challenge to sort of rise to the occasion. I was a really short kid when I grew up, so I was actually like snare drum wise, I was like really good, but I was too short to be in the snare drum line because like when you're marching with snare, like they want to keep all the snares even, so it looks like an even line. And so whatever I got on the line, it's like this little small tiny dip in the line, and it looks funny. So they had me march on first bass drum, a little 18-inch bass drum that I had to cart around as a 13-year-old, and I played all the snare drum parts on the bass drum for the most part.
it's
But
really
it
cool.
was yeah, definitely like instilled like a practice regimen and like just sort of a seriousness for the talent that I had and how to get better at it. And I would practice every day. I was just talking about this earlier. I had a session earlier. I practiced like 8 hours a day, man, like every day. And if I
That's
wasn't practicing, I was like doing homework and I had a drum pad with me all the time, just practicing my rudiments and like discovering all these new rhythms and new stickings and stuff like that. And that's all I wanted to do was just get better and learn more and and go nuts. Um,
It would never fly today, but I think treating the craft like that really does build a sense of discipline, and when it's met with that equal level of ambition and creative curiosity.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
It definitely like separated the people that were there casually and the people that really wanted to be there. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
which it was, and then it was kind of nice being the people that really wanted to be there and they're really working hard, just like you're working hard to like gain this goal. And like, there's competition, so it's competitive. So we're not just playing for fun; we're playing to win. So that's another element too. That's like another pressure, another, you don't want to go out there and lose, and we call it a loser. You know, I mean, this is kind of old world thinking, but I think that level of pressure and I think that level of manageable stress at that age, for me, turned out to be a good thing because I was able to manage stress really easily. Not easily, I was able to learn how to manage stress, learn how to work through a problem, learn how to like suck for a little bit until it gets good. And those are qualities that I keep to this day. Qualities that definitely helped me out as an adult and as a grown man. So I'm very grateful for, even though it was hard, I never really thought it sucked. So I'm really grateful for that period of my life, during my like sort of early teenage years.
Sure.
Um,
Sorry, you said that you grew up in a very musical household. So I'm curious where your mom was playing the flute, your dad was playing the drums, and I'm sure there are plenty of other musicians around. What specifically was it that drew you to the drums?
I don't remember. I don't even think I like just naturally gravitated towards it. Like
Hmm.
I don't really, and it wasn't like my parents were really forcing me to do it. Like I just kind of wanted to play drums. And, like they give me drumsticks and I started beating on stuff and any instrument that was around, I started playing on it. So I just think I was born with like a natural want and a natural ability to play something or be musical. So I was just, I think out of the womb, I was gravitated towards it. And then being that my parents were both musicians and we had a lot of music instruments around the house and there's a lot of musicians coming in and out, I just naturally assumed my role that I was born to do. I often tell people when they ask, how did you choose music? I'm like, well, I don't really think I chose anything. Music chose me. And luckily I was able to align myself with like my true inner being at a very young age. I didn't have to really think about it. And when I look back, it's not like I lived this altered life where like I have to change now. It's like, man, I knew what I was doing as soon as I knew how to know what I wanted to do. Like it wasn't a question. It was, I was authentic, at least in that decision from the get go. And I think it made the decisions that I made later on to continue to pursue music. It made those decisions a lot easier.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, so how does the drum line transition into jazz and fusion music?
So my mom was you know when my dad wasn't around, she was raising three interracial kids by herself, and she had to work at the same time. So she was a single parent. But she had her hands full. Bless her heart, like she's still alive, but she definitely like did the best she could with very limited resources. But she was a very resourceful woman. Um, she found this place to get me lessons, and it was affordable. We weren't making a lot of money. We're definitely very poor, and it was the best place for me to go at that time. So one year when I was 13, I think, um, she was like, she started like trying to find extracurricular programs, like either like a Saturday conservatory or places for me to go and take lessons or learn how to play music. And she found this camp in the Riverside Mountains here in California called Isamana. It's in Idlewild, and it's a jazz camp. It's band camp basically. But they had two programs. They had a jazz program and they had a classical program. And the classical program really wanted me because there weren't any really good classical percussionists that had classical training. But I was sick of playing classical music. I don't want to play that music no more. Like I was done. I wanted to play drums. And the only program they had available was jazz. So I was like, I'll give it jazz a shot. Like if that's the only place I can go to play drums, great. And the program there was, and I think still is, directed by this bass player Marshall Hawkins. He had a really great assortment of teachers and instructors there, and I learned how to play jazz at that camp that summer. And I went from like, knowing how to play basic like funk beats or rock beats from whatever was on the radio to like building a jazz drum vocabulary. First off, I had to learn how to the syncopation in order to play, a jazz ride time and like hit the hi hat on 2 and 4. And so I got that. That took me like a few days to like figure out. And then, okay, I got the basic. What do I do with this other hand? And I kind of naturally learned how to like be expressive with it and like comp and, um, you know, kind of follow the soloist. And like, I learned how to play in 6/8. The very first time I learned how to play like 6/8, I think I played Freedom Jazz Dance or something. Or yeah, Freedom Jazz Dance. Um, I didn't know how to do that, but I knew my rudiments. And I think the drum teacher there is like, playing 6/8, it's really easy. If you play a double paradiddle, that's 6/8. So put your right hand on a ride, and your left hand on the snare. And if you play a double paradiddle, you're playing 6/8. You can
I've
also play a
never
paradiddle diddle.
I've never thought of putting those two ideas together. Like it makes perfect sense.
It does, right? And I was like, okay, and I did it, and I was like, oh, now I'm playing in 6/8, okay. And then, you get used to that, and then you start getting more. I got used to that, and I started getting more expressive about it. And then I did that for a month, and like, barely knew how to play jazz. And then at that time, I was going into ninth grade, and my mom found a school called USC 32nd Street of Music and Art, which was a K through 9 at the time. It was a K through 9 school that was an arts magnet. And because earlier on in like fifth grade, like I tested into the magnet program or whatever, all of a sudden now I was able to go to these quote unquote magnet schools. And they had a jazz program there. They had a jazz department there. A little side note, little did I know, at that same school, in the elementary portion of that school, little baby Thundercat was also there. So was little baby Brandon Coleman and a 7-year-old Ronald Bruner. So they were all at that school. We all went to like elementary, junior high school together, or elementary, middle school together. But
That's
I didn't know them
crazy.
at that time. I knew their dad. I knew Thundercat and Ronald's dad because he would come into the jazz program and do little masterclass sessions every so often. But I didn't know who they were, and they weren't really like Ronald could play a little bit, but Steven wasn't really kicking ass yet. But what kind of really like started opening up my ears is my mom found this Saturday conservatory right down the street from that school. That school was in South Central. It was right down. It was like right across the street from USC. And in the USC practice rooms, they called them the Barodes back then. They had this Saturday conservatory school called the Colburn School. And at the time, it was only like a conservatory where like it was like they did stuff on the weekends and they had like an orchestra. They had a jazz band. They had like dance classes there. And so she got me in the jazz band. And man, it was like a kick-ass jazz band. Like I barely knew how to play time and barely knew how to play jazz. Barely knew who Elvin Jones or Art Blakey. Like didn't really know how to play any Afro-Cuban stuff or bossa nova, and they were running through all that stuff. And in that conservatory were some beasts, and they were all in high school or late, like maybe high school, but they were killing it. There was this trombone player Isaac Smith, this piano player Donald Vega, who plays with Ron Carter right now. Chickoria's manager at the time, Ron Moss, was there. His kid was playing drums. Brandon Coleman's older brother, Marcus Coleman, was playing bass. He's a piano player, but he was playing bass at the time because Greg Kurstin was playing piano in that group. I don't know if you guys know Greg Kurstin. He's a guy who produces Adele and Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
wow.
he's sick jazz pianist, like sick, and he was
I
in
had
that conservatory group.
I had no idea.
Yeah, along with another drummer, Karan, and a few other cats. But the group was sick, man. And I was barely making it. And I remember Brandon's brother Marcus used to always talk shit to me. Oh, you're dragging, man. You're dragging. oh man, now you're rushing, man. Man, you dragging any rushing. Man, you gotta listen to the music. You gotta take this seriously, man. Like you gotta hear, listen to these records. And he'd always give me records to go listen to them. I'd go listen. I wouldn't take it personal. I'm like, all right, I want to learn how to do this. And being in drum corps and like knowing how to go home and practice and like be serious about it. Like I got really serious about it. Started listening to more records. And then eventually, when I got to high school, I auditioned to be in this this arts high school here in Los Angeles called Los Angeles County High School of the Arts, LOXA. And it was at the time one of the first schools of its kind. It was purely art school. Like there was no sports, there was no anything else, and the school functioned like from 8 to 12 you did your academics, took an hour long lunch break, and then from 1 to 4 you did your arts area. So everybody kind of broke off into the arts area, and I was in the jazz school there, and that's really where I started opening up and learning about fusion and learning about weather report and Stanley Clark, and also still learning more about Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and the guys that were at that school were burning. Like there was this violin player, bass player trio, and they were playing like giant steps, like already at like little 15, 16 year olds playing giant steps like bee boo 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 bee boo, like super fast, and then they'd solo over the damn thing, and then as like a sort of soli, like ensemble soli, they played the first two choruses of John Coltrane's solo. So that's
Wow.
how I know that solo, because these kids were like playing this shit and like competing with it. Everybody's up there doing stolen moments at like 80 BPM, and these dudes are like bashing. So that's kind of like my first year in high school. That's kind of what I had to live up to, and it definitely like lit a fire under my butt. And I really started like playing on a lot of different bands, not just jazz. There was a lot of rock bands, a lot of punk bands, ska bands. And then started gaining more of my jazz vocabulary. And then at some point, I discovered Tony Williams, and like kind of really like I didn't really have like a drummer like I wanted to like really listen to and really like intently like figure out what they were doing, because for a little bit, like at least for me and my very limited knowledge of jazz, I thought it all sounded the same. I was like, this is cool, but drums aren't really like driving and like being expressive as this horn stuff. These my horn players are doing bat flips and like you know like doing acrobatic stuff on their instrument, and the drums are just kind of not as, I don't know, not as like athletic, I guess. But when I heard Tony Williams and like the '60s Miles stuff, and then the BSOP stuff, like that really got me, because he was one of the first drummers that I heard, especially my limited experience. One of the first drummers that I heard that was really being expressive and really had his own sound that was really unique, and would interact rhythmically um, with Miles and Herbie and Wayne, and with these really complicated rhythmical patterns that were over the bar line, and to me sounded really creative. So I kind of really kind of dug into that for like a good 3 4 years, and just listened to every record Tony Williams was on, every combination of stuff, and really gone into that. And then right before I went to college, I met Billy Higgins. Billy Higgins at the time had moved back to LA and sort of made his area of operation in Lamart Park, which is in Crenshaw, Los Angeles, South Central. Um, and he had a club there called the World Stage. Um, and he was just kind of like a permanent community fixture there. There was a few other jazz clubs at the time there, and that area of Los Angeles was going through like a jazz, African American jazz renaissance and hip hop renaissance. Um, so they had like three or four jazz clubs there at the time, and there was this one jazz club called Fifth Street Dicks that was like the coveted spot to like get a residency at. And like we tried. I mean, I had this group called the Infinity Project. It's a burning quartet, Um, and we tried forever to get this residency, and finally the owner was like, "All right, you guys can have every Wednesday night from 9 till 2 o'clock in the morning." When she play like 3 or 4 sets, so we're up there just blazing, like playing all kinds of crazy like things in 7/8 and 13/8, and really mixing it up, man, and like playing fast. And I finally at that time met a group of kids that really wanted to like push like the boundaries and the energetic sort of level of jazz. And one night Billy Higgins walks in and he's like, "Holy shit, man, where the hell have you been? I'm gonna take you under my wing, and you're gonna be with me now." And he kind of mentored me through college, and like when he was getting sick and before he passed away, I was his first call sub for all of his gigs. So I started playing with Charles Lloyd right before I graduated because Billy was playing with Charles Lloyd and he couldn't make it. And he told him, "Hey man, you gotta hire this kid." Um, and Billy kind of opened me up and sort of like propelled my career a little bit to play with a lot of the older musicians. Now, while I'm doing all this, um, little young Kamasi, when I was in high school, little young Kamasi and little young Miles Mosley and Brandon Coleman was originally playing drums and kind of switched over, was thinking about switching over to piano. They were like in junior high, like just starting to like play and just starting to like say a few things that sounded great. So as I started playing with older musicians, like people that are way older than me, I ran into Kamasi's dad on a gig, Ricky Washington, who tours with us. I was playing a gig. I can't remember who I was playing it with, but he was playing saxophone at a gig, and we played the gig. He's like, "Oh man, you sound great." He's like, "Man, you got to check out my son, Kamasi." And at the time, I was like, "Kamasi? What kind of name is that? Man? That sounds funny. Like, what kind of funny dude is named Kamasi, right?" Um, and Ricky's you know a great father in that respect, where he's always pushing his kids. So he's always like telling everybody what his kids are up to. He's like, "Man, you and Kamasi got to kind of meet, man. You'll sound great together." And eventually we met and we played, and I thought Kamasi sounded horrible at the time, but I could tell he had this thing, this energy about him that, like, man, once you get there, once you get like the facility of your instrument together, you're gonna be badass. And I just kind of kept in contact with him, and whenever he asked me to do gigs, I was like, "Yeah, let's do some gigs." And
Sorry,
so his
sorry. At this point, you're in college or about to graduate college, and
I'm in high
Kamasi's
school at this
in.
point.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, okay. And
I'm in high
Kamasi's
school,
in like
junior
early
high,
middle school, junior high.
something
Okay.
like that. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, so we kind of like formed the collective before we knew we were forming the collective, which was basically like the top sort of jazz players in Los Angeles that didn't move to New York, you know, because there was a bunch of killing jazz musicians that come from LA. Ben Wendell comes from LA. You know, there's a ton of cats that come here and then move to New York because New York was for a very long time sort of the epicenter of jazz. But you know, we stayed here, and so we kept running into each other. So we had our legitimate gig stuff that we did to make money. And after I graduated college, I was off touring with Charles Lloyd, and I started doing blues. I was touring with Chris, what's his name, man, Solomon Burke for a while. Um, I did a lot of touring, but then when I was at home, we'd still do local gigs together and like put together little groups with Steven, me, uh, Brandon, or Miles, me, and Kamasi and Brian, and you know we put together groups and like play for other people. Did that for years and years and years. I think one of the groups we did all together was Lauren Hill's band. Lauren Hill finally had came to LA after she had been to a few other cities and was looking to put together a band. And at the time, Miles Mosley was MDing the band, and he got us all in the band for a minute. I had to leave because I got another opportunity, but we kept doing that sort of thing. Kamasi and Ryan were in Snoop Dogg's band for a while with Terrace. Terrace was also in LA. That's how we're all really good friends. We all know each other since at least high school. Actually, Terrace came to join me at my college, Cal Arts, to because I was there. He was like, "Man, Tony's over there at Cal Arts. Must be something good happening up there." And so he went up to Cal Arts and did a year up at Cal Arts with me over at college. But anyways, but we kept like all just staying together and playing together, and eventually, um, Miles got like a residency. He had a couple residencies, but he had this one residency like maybe he got it almost like 16, 17 years ago at this little dingy dive bar in Hollywood called the Piano Bar. It's on Selma between Cahuenga and Wilcox. And these two uh, entrepreneurs had just bought this dingy, shitty dive bar that used to be a legitimate piano bar. And they wanted to turn it into like a bar slash music place, you know? But they didn't have any permits, didn't have anything. So we played there every Wednesday at first. And it was just trio. It was me, Miles, and Brandon. And we had some other like casual gig, like right before our first day at Piano Bar. And it was like it was like super casual, like some wine and cheese event, whatever. No one was listening to the music. And I'd done a bunch of gigs like that already, you know, and I was kind of worn out by it. I was like, man, I really hate doing these wine and cheese gigs because no one's really listening. It's more or less like people have jazz at their little party just so they can seem more like cultured, you know. It's like more of a fixture than anybody listening to the music. So I remember we made a conscious decision. We were like, well, if no one's really going to listen to the music, then let's try to do some different stuff that we wouldn't normally play in front of an audience. Let's just treat this like a rehearsal, you know, paid rehearsal. So we started like opening up and like doing, trying to like make new arrangements of some of the standards that we normally play. And then we started playing like jazz versions of like famous film score stuff by John Williams. And it was kind of neat. It kind of made the gig like actually fun because now we're like exploring new musical territory and like pushing sort of the boundaries of you know some of these boring jazz standards, those jazz standards that we played a million times in a very boring way. Now we're kind of revisiting them with like a sort of new light. And when we got the trio gig at this piano bar place, the sort of me, Miles, and Brandon were like, all right, let's. No one was there because it was a new bar, and no one like I don't know, it was like maybe one or two people that would come every day or every Wednesday. And I was like, all right, well, if no one's going to be here, you know, until this gets really popping, let's also treat this like a rehearsal and let's no one play any stock parts. Like, let's not treat it like a part gig. Like, whatever your first, like, um, whatever your first, like, inclination is to do musically, don't do that. Like, pick, like, the second, third, or fourth, or fifth thing. You know, like, dig deep and see, like, what kind of, it might suck, and that's fine. There's no one here, you know, so you know, we might have to figure it out, and you know, you might be throwing out a bunch of bad ideas, but like eventually we're gonna hit like a really good idea that's gonna sound totally different. Um, and so eventually, like I don't know, maybe like after a month or so, we started getting like this vocabulary of new ways of playing songs that we've been playing for years, decades even. And then like Ryan started coming by. It's like, oh man, you guys over there playing new music? Wow, I'm gonna bring some of my charts. I'm gonna come play. And at first he was just doing it for free, and it sounded so good. We're like, oh well, let's take a little pay cut to have Ryan come and play. You know, like this gig's not really about the money; it's more about the exploration. And then eventually Kamasi started coming. You know, it's like, oh man, the homies are over at this new spot that like you can actually play, and they're not telling them what to do or to turn down or you know, like you could there's some dive bar that no one really cares about, and like you could just go in there and like bring in new songs and like kind of stretch them out and like you know figure them out before like you get told to be quiet or whatever. Like this sounds dope. So we had like a little quintet with me, sometimes Brandon, sometimes Cameron, Miles, Ryan, and Kamasi, and that's pretty much where like that sound started from. At least the sound, like the modernization of that sound. Kamasi had another group earlier on with Cameron, Thundercat, and Ronald, where they kind of did like some straight ahead stuff and kind of delved into some things. But the sound of like, you know, Miles on bass and a lot of the stuff that made the first record, the Epic, kind of started at this place called Piano Bar. That's kind of all those songs that are on those records were things that Kamasi had brought in new. and like we kind of struggled with it or like tried to flip it on its side and like bring in new ways of playing those songs until they sounded good. And at the time, after about I don't know 4 or 5 years, like everybody started noticing that we were in there blazing. Like, oh shit, there's this band that's like fucking blazing every Wednesday, and we eventually got Friday nights. Every Wednesday and Friday night, there's this band called the West Coast Get Down. They're blazing. Like they're not playing like at the time a lot of bands that like had residencies were playing like top 40 stuff or like gospeled out R&B songs, like all the Prince stuff or all the Michael Jackson stuff or all the Stevie Wonder stuff, which is cool, but like it's like you go in one bar and hear one band play the same Prince song that the bar down the street was playing. It's like, all right, I get it. Like it's a nice song and all, but like this is kind of like a Muzak version of the song. But here we are playing original music, you know, and sometimes we let people sit in too, and they would sound horrible because like it's not like badass musicians too, man. Come in there and try to sit in, and they'd sound awful because it's not. There's no ledger for this type of music that we're playing. There was no way to describe it. There definitely wasn't any way to like learn it beforehand. We had these intense arrangements with these different ways of looking at how to um, affect the audience with their music. And the audience that we're playing to was a bar audience. The beer and the booze was cheap, and they poured the drinks stiff, and people were noisy, and we didn't care. It's like, hey, we came in here to play as loud as we fucking want. So if the people are going to be noisy, then we're just playing louder and like treat this more like we're a rock band. We're not going to call it jazz. Like we'll just call it music and see if the people like it or not. And eventually, the people started really digging it, man. They didn't know they were listening to jazz. They just thought they were listening to like really, really energetic like music, and you knew you had a good song or a good arrangement when like people would cheer after the shit. Like you get these like 20 somethings, cheering for your jazz song. At the time it was unheard of. It was early 2000s, and no one cared about jazz anymore. Jazz was like a bad four-letter word, and all the major record companies had dumped their jazz artists, and everybody was in DJ culture, and that's what we were kind of competing with. And so we're like, all right, well, what if we play this music in a way that competes to the energy that the DJ has, but it's live? And that's sort of how we started building our sound and building our sort of musical vocabulary.
Knowing what you were up against, like competing against DJ culture, competing against top 40 cover bands, it's so incredible that you guys just converged at what on paper would have been the least likely of settings for this to take off.
Oh, the whole
Um,
thing was unlikely. I mean, we're at a dive bar,
absolutely. Absolutely.
we're
Jazz in the 2000s.
yeah, jazz in the 2000s at a dive bar, where people are probably wanting coming in and listen to rock and roll. It smelled bad. Like there was all kinds of fights outside and shit. Like it was. I mean, I guess it was more on par with like jazz in the 60s in New York before it became sort of like this. New York became, in my opinion, this is a total, opinion. Jazz in New York became very institutional.
Okay. I
There
could
was a
understand that.
correct,
Yeah.
it's like a correct way to do this, and this is how jazz is. And a lot of people definitely had a very like conservative opinion as to what jazz was, especially when you moved there. There was this sort of level and interpretation that the ballad's this way, and like when you're gonna play rhythm changes, you use this altered chord here, and like it was very it was definitely a lot more strict. And at the time, because jazz wasn't as widely popular in the world and everybody was moving to New York, the spotlight on jazz was in New York. Spotlight wasn't in LA, and so no one really gave a shit what we were doing. No one was like, we didn't have a big enough spotlight for people to be like, that's wrong. You need to change that. But if we were to do this in New York, people would be like, no, that's not right. You can't, no, you can't play that chord over with this beat. That's a different type of music, sir. Sorry. And it's not exactly that way, but that's the way it sort of felt. And that's definitely got pressures um, from any New York musicians that would come and visit at first. Um, so in a way, we were kind of like jazz's little illegitimate stepchild, that like no one knew about until later, and we were kind of off on our own, in our own origin story, like creating this new section of exploration and improvisational music, and nobody was really there to critique it or say it was wrong, so we just kept going on it, and we were building on our influences of what was around us. We were building on definitely heavily on our hip hop influences, and me and my rock and roll influences, and fusion influences, and
I was just about to ask, given how you have made this East Coast West Coast connection and like almost this institutionalization of it, how much of growing up in LA at a time when hip hop is exploding and rock is totally changing, and then you're surrounded by drumline and these jazz schools, how much did all of that kind of converge and play into, like, was that a conscious thing that was just there, or was it just in the water?
it's almost like all that stuff was here in Los Angeles. I grew up. I was a teenager in Los Angeles during the '90s. And it was like at the start of NWA, at the start of like this West Coast hip hop sound. Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, all them cats. Uh, and In Lamart Park, right next door to one of the jazz clubs, was this place called Project Bloat, which was kind of like um, sort of like the continuation of this club that or this place that used to be in Lamart Park called the Highlight. And like anybody who was into hip hop in Los Angeles went to Project Bloat, and like they would freestyle, have battles, and like invent new stuff. There was a band that, or not a band, a group that kind of came out of their Freestyle Fellowship that was like super heavy in Lamart Park. And when they were kind of done at Project Boat, they come up to the jazz spot and like sit in and like take a fucking solo, but they'd be like freestyle. So it was already kind of like being open to that at a young age. I was like, hey, these musics do fit together, man. Like this isn't these categories is kind of like it's silly. It's just a way to sell this shit, but this is all music, and it kind of all comes from the same place. There's just a different aesthetic, and maybe they're using different colors than we're using, but the picture is very similar. Like the origin of it is very similar, and it's coming from LA, which if you're around in the '90s, was a very tumultuous time to live, especially as a child. It was dangerous, man. It was gang warfare, man. If you got out of there alive, you were lucky, because there are a lot of my friends that are dead or in jail, and everybody who grew up here has a similar story, no matter what part of town you grew up in. So there was this stuff that was happening in your neighborhood that you saw, and like, either you were going to be a part of the negative portion of it, or you're going to learn how to like communicate that in some way. And hip hop learned how to communicate that on stage, and LA jazz at the time, at least for young people that had to go through that, they were communicating it through their horns and their my drums and like our bands, even though it wasn't we weren't communicating with words, we're definitely communicating in the intensity of the music.
Cool. I mean, on that convergence of jazz and hip hop, I know that some members of the West Coast Get Down were present at for the recording of some of Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. I also know that, like, well, not know per se, but there's lots of stories floating around of just these all night jams that Kendrick would just sit in on and write words to. And while you're not listed in the credits with Terrace and Kamasi and Thundercat, were you ever a part of that sort of early jamming collaborative process? Were you ever
No, I
there?
wasn't, unfortunately. I was kind of busy at the time, so Terrace never really hit me up to be a part of those sessions. That kind of folded out of Kendrick had this record that he had remade like three times or so, man, and like he was really trying to dig deep to come and do something different. And he kind of hooked up with Terrace and like Flying Lotus and like even Joseph Lineberg, who I went to college with, who did a lot of beats for Snoop and a lot of West Coast hip hop stuff. But his roots were jazz. He started like messing around with a lot of cats that like had some jazz roots, and yeah, they did a bunch of jam sessions. Unfortunately, I wasn't never got called into doing any of those because I was busy. I was on the road trying to make money, and I just wrong timing or whatever. But a lot of the cats in the West Coast Get Down were involved in that record, even if it was a smaller way.
Cool.
Kamasi got tapped to do the horn arrangements and the string arrangements. Um, Terrace was a huge part of that record. Uh,
hmm
so yeah, it was interesting. And at that time, right after that happened, we didn't know. It was just another session to those dudes. It's like, I work for this rapper Kendrick, man. Like, music sounds cool, but who knows what's gonna happen? It's like it sounds a lot different, and it don't sound like the stuff that's on the radio. So it's hard to like get excited because you're just used to this machine like discarding anything that doesn't follow the algorithm. So it's hard to like think or be positive or confident that anything like cool or authentic is ever going to come out. Um,
Makes sense.
and then at that time, um, we had been at the piano bar for such a long time, and Steven would come in at the piano bar and sit in. So it was like the full on sort of collective. I also engineered, and I've been engineering since I was 7 years old. I mean, most of the bands that I'm in, I'm the one that engineers the record. So at that time, I started producing and engineering a record for Miles Mosley at my house here at the studio. And this is small, so it was a great place to like do a full band, but we could do bass and drums or keys and bass and like kind of like overdub stuff afterwards. But after a while, we're like, man, we should really like go into a real studio, and, like throw down some budget to like go into a studio that has more room and like more channels so that we can kind of really dive in. And at the time, Kamasi had been cutting records in his garage with like, a Digio one and like some Behringer preamps. And it had a vibe, but it wasn't something you could sell at a record store or anything like that. Like, but it did document the music. But he was selling it, out of his trunk, or like at little, gigs that he was playing at. So I kind of went up to Kamasi. I was like, hey man, Miles is thinking about like renting a studio. I was like, man, you and him should go in on a studio because like this music here is like it's starting to sound really good. I'll engineer it and like let's record this stuff right, and like maybe you'll get a record deal off of it. And so we put together some money. We tried to look at a bunch of different studios, like real studios, like Capitol and the Village, and they were just too damn expensive, and we couldn't afford it. Um, so we started asking some of the other guys in the collective, like, hey man, we're thinking about pitching in and getting a studio. And Cameron was like, oh, I'm down. I'll throw in some money. Ryan threw in some money. Kamasi's dad threw in some money. Ronald threw in some money. I think Brandon threw in some money. So now instead of like having a couple $1,000s, we had like a few $1,000s that everybody kind of threw in on. And the idea was like, okay, we're going to get this studio for a certain amount of time, and then we'll just cut everybody's record at the same time. And like, I'll play on your record, you'll play on mine. So more of like a co-op type of deal. And
Is
so we found
this
this studio.
is this like
Found the
December 2011?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, I had a note about that. I am so
Yeah.
curious about this session. Keep going.
We found this studio. And I remember me, Kamasi, and Miles were over here, right here, staring at this computer screen, trying to find studios that would be affordable. And like, I remember Kamasi was like, "Man, you got to go, going on Google, recording studios, LA, and just like calling these dudes up." And Kamasi's like, "Man, you got to go to like the fifth search page, the fifth or sixth search page. It's like these first page things are gonna be too expensive." Like, and sure enough, we on the sixth page was this place, King Size Lab in Glass Hill Park. Um, it was owned by this guy David, and like at the time, it was kind of looked more like a hippies version of a studio, but they had all the gear there. It just didn't look like super nice, right? They had a beautiful Neve 8068, and enough of the good mics and enough isolation for us to record in there. And you know, we all decided to record in December because that's when everybody was in town, right? Because in LA, like when it's around the holidays, everybody goes home to where they're from. But we're from here, so we stay here. So it was like the only time where we're all kind of in the same area. And at that time, what was nice is because everybody's out of here, nobody's recording. So all the studios are available. And King Size Lab, I think they only had like maybe two clients that whole entire month. They had booked 2 days. And we rolled in there like, hey man, here's what we have. Can we take the whole month of December and like we're gonna like really use the heck out of the studio? And we're planning on doing like 8 different records, and we're gonna have Thundercat come in here. We're gonna have all kind of. I think Flying Lotus came in for a couple sessions. Oh, even George Duke came in to do some stuff, and we just started throwing a bunch of names around. And Dave was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want. I'll tell the other two people that have bookings here to get lost to do it in January. Like this is why I built this studio." And for that month of December, man, we were in there every day from like 8 in the morning till 4 o'clock in the morning cutting. We cut like 13 songs a day. And everybody has schedule from 8 in the morning to 12 was Miles's time. From 12 to 4 was Kamasi's time. We took a 1 hour lunch break. From 5 to 9 was Ryan's time. And then we go to do piano bar. And then we come back and do some more stuff. Do overdubs this time. We had a whole like whiteboard with the whole schedule with post-it notes and everything, and everything was plugged in all at the same time. And Kamasi, I think at the end of the month we left with like something like 178 songs, and Kamasi had probably about 6 records worth of material.
And that was in just a single month.
1 month, yeah,
That's
1 month,
crazy.
13 songs a day, some stuff. And the thing is like because we've been playing together so much, we cut some of this stuff one take, Jake, like one take, two take, boom, that's it. And so sometimes we had free time. So Cameron had this idea. He was like, all right, let's record for an entire half an hour, and every 10 minutes, like set your watch, and every 10 minutes change the key. We're just gonna play improvised music, and every 10 minutes change the key, and that's all I'm gonna say. So we basically did 2 recording sessions of that. Like we just started getting really experimental and like really like searching, and none of that stuff has been released yet, but it kind of like helped us like discover each other's playing. And like when we're kind of creatively drained, and you've already used all of your best stuff, it's like now you got to find this other stuff because we got like 2 more weeks to go. We don't want to squander this time, this opportunity to be in like a real recording studio and make stuff that could possibly be legendary. And that was in 2011. And Kamasi left with a ton of material. Miles left with a ton of material. Ronald left with a ton of material. Everybody left with a ton of material. And then Kamasi was like, "Hey," and Kamasi just had the rhythm section. He had me, Ronald, Miles, and Steven. He had like a double quartet with 4 horns on most of the stuff. Some of it was just one drums, but his idea was like to have 2 quartets. Um, and then like after like a few months where he sat with the music, he's like, "Man, I want to put choir and strings on this." I was like, "Man, are you serious, dude? Like this stuff is super thick, man. Like we're blazing all over your songs, man. Like you're hearing room for a choir and strings. Like, man, this is gonna be way over people's head. I mean, yeah, let's do it. It sounds amazing, but I don't know if people are gonna get this, man." So we do it, and Kamasi leaves with this huge sounding record, and then eventually hooks up with Flying Lotus over at Brainfeeder, and Brainfeeder signs him, and the record sat on a shelf for like 2 3 years and almost didn't get released because at the time we had a rumor that Don was looking at Brainfeeder, looking at buying Brainfeeder, Blue Note. And a lot of times when record companies consolidate that way, the people that haven't been released kind of get shelved. And so Kamasi was about to just pull the record and put it out himself, and we're like, "Nah, man, just like wait a little bit." Like, Flying Lotus keeps like changing the release time because I don't know, he was waiting for something. He's waiting for like the right moment. And then that Kendrick record came out, and Kendrick didn't do any interviews, right? He didn't want to like be any part of like the like red carpet promotion of his record. So all these news outlets, NPR and uh, uh, BBC, and the Canadian news agencies out there, CDC, they were all trying to like get the inside scoop of how this record was recorded. And so they look at the credits, and Kendrick had listed Kamasi, tenor saxophone and string arranger, like right underneath Terrace or whatever. Like he was like the next person. And so they'd interview Terrace, and Terrace would do his interviews. And like, "Oh, let's talk to this Kamasi guy." And Kamasi, talked about the whole story about how he was going in there in Kendrick, and he's like, "And guess what? Like I'm releasing a record soon, And all those dudes that were on that session are on my record. And they were like, oh, well, shoot, we got to take a look at you. Then definitely like keep our number. Like we want to be the first to like break the news of when this record comes out. And then it was the timing was right. And then they had a release schedule for the Epic. And when it released, it was already, the press was already waiting for it because Kamasi had been affiliated with To Pimp a Butterfly. And it kind of opened up certain gates that probably wouldn't have been opened up had that not have happened.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, before we jump right into your work with Kamasi,
Mhm.
um, of all of that music that was recorded in that month, how much would you say is remains unreleased today?
Oh, probably 80% of it.
Wow,
Yeah, I got
that's
the hard drive still.
unreal.
There's a ton of stuff.
That is insane.
I
Hmm.
mean, the basic track for Kamasi's song on Fearless Movement, "Let's Get Lit," that was recorded in 2011.
Really?
Yeah, the
Wow,
drum part and some of those horn parts and the I think Steven's on that, the bass part, that was recorded in 2011.
crazy. You also mentioned that Kamasi would play with like a double quintet sort of thing, two drummers. I know that on some of the track listings, you and Ronald are both listed as drums on some of the same songs, and I thought that maybe that was just an error somewhere.
Nope.
You guys are playing drums at the same time.
Yeah. So basically, Kamasi's known Ronald since he was around 3 years old. They met when they were like toddlers because their dads, Ronald's dad's a drummer and Kamasi's dad's saxophone player, used to play together a lot. So they knew each other from a very young age and, grew up listening to music and playing music together. Ronald's a little bit younger than Kamasi, and I'm about like 3, 4 years older than Kamasi. So like when those guys were like in elementary school and junior high, I was almost a damn near adult. So they kind of looked up to me. I was like their older, adult brother that like had his own car and lived in his own apartment, had a first one to have a girlfriend, first one to like go on tour. But Kamasi always had some kind of group he was messing with, and when Ronald couldn't do it, he'd hire me, and he liked my playing, so sometimes he would just hire me. And when I couldn't do it, he'd hire Ronald. And when we do these little recording sessions at his house, he'd have both me and Ronald come, and we just like kind of trade off playing drums, just one of us at a time. Um, Fast forward to when we started playing at piano bar. We started playing at a piano bar, and after it started getting really big, a lot of people would come and sit in. Ronald would come and sit in. Sometimes if I couldn't do the gig, I'd get Ronald to do it. Um, you know, um, and one night I was just setting up for the gig, and Ronald calls me. He just landed in LA. He was on tour with Shaka Khan, and he goes, "Hey man," he's like, "Hey man, you think I can come by and play at piano bar?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm on the gig, but you can come and sit in as many songs as you want, no biggie." He's like, "No, no, no." He's like, "Man, I've been playing all this pop stuff, man. Like, I kind of want to do like the two drummer thing." He's like, "Can I just come and bring like a second small kit and like we'll play two drums?" And I was like, "Well, man, it's kind of cramped up here, but I mean, whatever. I'm open to it. Fuck it. It'll be something different." And that's kind of the jumping point that we started this whole gig on. So yeah, bring your drum set. Let's see what happens. And he brought it, and I remember Kamasi was like, "Man, this is like the best of both worlds. It's like the two sounds that I hear when I'm like writing my music is either you on drums or Ronald on drums, and now you're both on drums, and now I get like this double sound thing that like I really dig." And then it kind of inspired Steven and Miles to sort of play at the same time too. Miles was like, "Well, if there's gonna be two drums, why can't there be two basses?" And then like now everybody could be involved because then now Cameron plays piano, and Brandon's also a brilliant piano player, but he's also really affluent on like the synth stuff, and so now he can play piano and synths. And so it started becoming this sound we started creating was like not just how we arrange the music, but also how we play it in the sort of double rhythm section, double sort of rhythm section trio stacked with like three or four horns. And so that's where the idea came from. And then when we went into the studio at King Size, Kamasi was like, "I want two drums set up, and I want two drums and two basses." And Cameron and Brandon both to play at the same time. We used every single channel in that damn studio, every microphone. Like it looked like the Millennium Falcon, man. Like I was plugging things into all kinds of different spaces and trying to make this thing work. We barely fit in there, but that was the sound that he wanted. And on a lot of the stuff that's on the first record, the Epic, it's me and Ronald playing at the same time.
How do you like creatively balance that as a drummer, like when to fill, when not to, the changes, like how does it, because you learn so much, especially playing with musicians in any style, but going to jazz school, you learn so much about when to play out and when not to. But I've never been in a context where I would play beside another drummer and get that gleam that same skill set. Like how did you find that balance?
Well, it's interesting. There's definitely a lot of different ways you can look at it. You can look at it from maybe one drummer is sort of just keeping the time, the other drummers being more expressive, being more improvisational, or you trade turns or whatever. But I think what originally made it sound great when we tried it the first time was, Roland and I grew up together, so we kind of grew up being inspired by similar stuff, and our vocabulary of music was very similar. Even though our playing styles were somewhat different, and our approach to music was a little bit different, where we were coming from and our how deep um, our palette of music was similar. It's like a lot of at that time, and a lot of gospel musicians were becoming more prevalent, but they only knew one thing. They knew all the gospel music. They didn't understand 1960s bossa nova or any sort of Afro-Cuban music, or any sort of North Indian or South Indian music. Um, and I studied all that stuff, and like they weren't necessarily listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra or Pat Metheny or but like I listened to that. So if Ronald played a quote or played something that was similar to that thing, it's like I know what you're doing. I can kind of go there too. So I think originally we didn't really talk about it. We kind of just did it, and where there was space for me to do my thing, I'd do my thing, and where there was space for Ronald to do his thing, he did his thing. And sometimes it would um, butt heads, and sometimes we both leave too much space, and then you just kind of figure it out. And it was definitely an interesting sort of experiment, and definitely an interesting thing. There's no real guideline that you could follow. Sure, easy guideline is to just play simple and don't step on each other's feet. But sometimes then you're playing it too safe. You're not really exploring what this space could be. Sometimes you got to get a little messy and bump into each other to really figure out where your boundaries are, and not just musical boundaries, but also physical boundaries. So we've had plenty of band meetings about it, and we talk about it. But I feel like the times in which it works best is when it's unspoken, and there's no sort of plan, and it's really if both two drummers are listening and their intent is to make music together. um, I think you're going to create something that's unique that one drummer can't do.
For
And you
sure.
kind
And
of, in some respect, and I'll say this personally, because you know I've studied drums for so long, and because if I'm playing with a second drummer who's drumming, I know they're going to do something at this particular moment, then I'll treat it like I'm setting up a horn line. Like if you're in a big band, like the trumpets are about to do their shout section, you set that sucker up, right? So if I know Ronald's going to rip into this big ass fill or change his little beat right here, I'm gonna set it up like I would he was a horn player. So if you start to take that mentality, then you start opening up new ways to like play drums where you're not playing the same fills, or you're not sort of butting heads.
it's crazy if you just treat the drums like a musical instrument.
Yeah, duh. It is.
So the Epic comes out. It's this sprawling debut album, like three movements over 3 hours long. Um, you continue working with Kamasi for years and years to come. Um, but you guys have just released a new record this year, Fearless
That's right.
Movement.
Like the beginning of this month.
Yeah, and I would say it is a top contender to be album of the year. I think it's one of the most creatively interesting things I've heard in so long, and
Awesome.
knowing the collective that it comes from, like that's no surprise. Um,
Yeah.
What can you tell me about the writing and recording behind Fearless Movement?
I think by the time, this is Kamasi's third major release, and we've had like an EP. That was a special commission for the Whitney Museum that he released called Harmony of Difference. And we've done a few other recording projects for movies and commercials. And by now, like we're kind of like music studio veterans. Even myself as an engineer, I know how this band sounds. And I know how to record them. I know how to record. I know how to get Kamasi sound. Like it's easy to me. Um, I know what mics, what preamps, what compressors to plug them into, how to isolate everybody, how to like, and it's a large group to try to record. There's not a lot of studios here, even in LA, that could fit that many musicians, two drum sets into one studio, and have it properly isolated and recorded well so that it's easy to mix. Um, so by the time we started the first sessions for the Fearless Movement, which were at Lorby Studios, as a matter of fact, um, uh, we started recording like like mid-pandemic. Um, uh, what's his face over at the Tonight Show?
Uh,
Um,
Jimmy Fallon?
Jimmy
What?
Fallon. Jimmy Fallon's people hit up Kamasi. I think sometime in December or maybe even like November. And they're like, "Hey, we might be able to get you on Jimmy Fallon. Are you interested?" Because at the time, the Roots knew who we were, and I think we had played at a few of their festivals or ran into them a couple times on the road. And I think Amir or someone up from their camp was like, "Hey, man, you should probably get Kamasi to play on the show. That would be pretty neat." I don't know if it was their exact suggestion or someone on there, but it was definitely like when they were like, "We should get some jazz." They're like, "Well, why don't you get Kamasi Washington? That'd be kind of dope because they have the stage presence that would fit this show." Um, so we got word through Kamasi's management, like, "Hey, Fallon wants you guys to perform, but we need something to promote because we can't just go up there playing our regular set. Like it's a promotional show. Like you don't go on the Tonight Show without anything to promote, a new record or whatever it is, a new TV show, a book, a comedy tour. Like it's pretty much like even though it's entertaining, it's pretty much like revolved around promotion of whatever it is that you're promoting." So I remember I had just taken a flight um, to Canada to go visit my partner, my new girlfriend at the time. Um, And as I was taking off, Kamasi's like, "Hey man, can you be in the studio in 3 days? Like we got to do this thing for Fallon." I was like, "Dude, I'm taking off right now, man. Like I'm supposed to spend 2 weeks like on vacation, like visiting my girlfriend." And so I was like, "All right." So I had to cut my vacation short, which my girlfriend was not very happy about, and flew back to LA. And we went straight into Larrabee Studios and recorded like 5 songs, I think, 5 or 6 songs. And one of them was Garden Path, and that was a song that we used on Jimmy Fallon. We played that song on Jimmy Fallon to sort of like hint about this new record that's coming out, which hadn't been really recorded yet. It was just sort of like, "Hey, we should go in the studio and record something to be on Jimmy Fallon," and then like, "Hey, this sounded really good. Like, let's make an album later at some point," you know. But we're mid-pandemic, so it was tough to get into a studio, and it was tough to like do recording sessions.
Because Garden Path came out like in 2022, I want to say. Like that was a couple
Yeah,
years ago, right?
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, like 2022, like the beginning of 2023.
Okay.
We did that specifically just for Fallon. Like we went in the studio, made that song just for Fallon, and it was neat because it was like, "Hey man, we don't really have anything to promote, but we're gonna make you a special song, and that'll be like the exclusive thing you get." And they were all really happy with it. And they haven't had that many musicians on stage playing live, so it was a bit tricky to like do that show at Fallon, but everybody was like super excited about it. And like even the director and the producers were like, "Man, this is awesome. We never get to do this. This is so fucking awesome." And, the dudes in the Roots, man, they're all really cool, man. And it was like they're like, "Man, finally we got some real music on this show, man." And like they were like definitely seemed like they were a lot more excited. And Amir, he's a legend and someone that we all look up to, and he was very inviting and definitely welcomed us, and that was a really great experience. And so we kind of used the momentum from that experience to go back in the studio. And Two of the songs that made it on this record from those sessions at Larrabee were Garden Path and then Brandon's song Interstellar. Interstellar's what's the name of the song? I can't remember. Interstellar Peace. Um, so we recorded that when we did Garden Path back at Larrabee, and then basically Kamasi started booking Sunset Sound here in Los Angeles. I think 2 or 3 times to like really get in to like recording the music and recording this new record. And he kind of opened it up to us. He's like, "Hey guys, if you guys have any songs, and like bring them in. Like, I want to like sort of reach new territory and kind of like treat this record as maybe go down some new avenues that we haven't gone through before." And I engineer all Kamasi stuff. Um, so it was kind of cool for me because it was like, I know how to make you guys sound good, but now we got these new songs in here that are really dope, and like we're kind of like learning them, on the floor and like still like playing our asses off. And Kamasi recorded that record since like pretty much over the next 2.5 years, in successive sessions. And I think the last thing we recorded as a band was the Andre 3000 track, um, which was a fluke. We weren't supposed to do that.
Oh no.
Um, no, there's an interesting story about that.
Tell me this
Uh,
story.
yeah. Uh, um, we had Get Lit basically,
Yeah.
that George Clinton had sort of took some interest in. He's like, "Man, I want to do something on this song." And Kamasi's like, "All right." And the sort of character of that song lends itself to like uh, someone spitting a verse or like a rap or whatever, right? And at the time, Andre 3000 had been coming to some of our shows, and we knew a couple of people in his camp, and so we reached out to him, like, "Hey, man, we're working on this new record, man. You interested in collaborating with us?" He's like, "Yeah, love to. I'm only available this day," and it happened to be a day that we were coming back from Australia. So we had already been on a flight for 16 hours, and me and Kamasi go to the studio like at midnight to meet Andre 3000 and play this Get Lit song. So he comes in with two duffel bags, right? And I got everything all set up from like spit vocals. And he comes in with these two duffel bags. I'm like, "That's a little strange. What you got in them duffel bags, man?" Like, all right, whatever. And Andre 3000, man, he's such a genuine human being, such a nice dude. And he's Andre 3000, man. Like, he's like one of the most iconic voices, not just in hip hop, but in the world right now. You could pick out his
Absolutely.
voice at anything. He's such an eloquent,
If
you
he
know,
wants if he wants to bring two duffel bags, he's gonna bring two duffel bags, you know?
who am I? I don't know what's in there, what kind of inspiration he needs. So Kamasi cuts on the track and he turns up the volume real loud. He plays on the track like 4 or 5 times. And I'm just sort of sitting there bobbing his head. And Kamasi's like, "Hey, man, so, what were you thinking you want to do on this, man?" He's like, "I don't know. What do you think?" He's like, "I don't know, man. Like, do you hear any like vocals, man, or anything like that?" He's like, "Oh." He's like, "I'm not really doing vocals these days anymore, man. I'm not really speaking no more." And we're like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "I'm actually playing these wooden flutes now." And he goes in the duffel bags and pulls out like four of these wooden flutes. And we're like, "Doink!" Like, what the fuck? Like, he's like, "Yeah, this guy Guillermo made me these flutes, man." And like, "I'm really into this now, man. I'm like kind of a different spiritual journey." And I'm like, "Okay, this is where's is this hidden camera prank or some shit? Like this can't be real." Like, I thought we was getting like Andre 3000 to dip one of his iconic voice verses on there, and here he comes. He pulls out these flutes. I'm like, "Oh man, this track is definitely not right for these flutes, man." And these aren't like a regular classical flute. This is like a Native American flute. Like it's diatonic and it's or pentatonic. So it's in like a particular scale and key. You can't play like the flute has to be tuned to that scale and that key. And our song was not in any of those scales or keys. So we spent like 3 4 hours trying to like fit this wooden flute that's in a totally different key and out of tune to this track that just didn't want flute on it, or at least that type of flute. And then later on in that evening, Brandon comes by because he was going to do some keyboard overdubs, and he's listening to it. And he's like, "Man," he goes, "Man, this isn't working." He's like, I think like we're trying to fit what Andre does now onto something we've already previously made like a while ago. He's like, I think we need to like make something new and fit it to what he's doing right now. Like, why don't we just set up like a little trio and like, why don't you, Kamasi and Andre, why don't you guys just vibe and like me and Tony will like roll with you. And so I set up quickly mic to pair a drum kit. They had some house kit there. Set up some mics for Kamasi and Andre to play in the same room. Brandon had brought this Moog Voyager. He's gonna play key bass on, and we just cut that track first take Jake on the floor. Like, all right, let's press record. What you got? And Andre started playing that flute part, and then Brandon came in with a bass line, and then I just came in on the drums and like kind of just created that on the fly. And that's how that song like was made. And I was like, well, this definitely saved the day because we were about to waste this man's time and our time after this long ass flight from Australia and come up with nothing. But like this was actually a great idea because now we have this different thing that's like kind of a different exploration on the record. It turned out to be something.
There's so much to unpack from that story. First, I love that he didn't think to tell you that, like, the assumption is if Andre's coming into the studio, I mean, up until New Blue Sun came out last year, I think the assumption was that he's gonna rap. So the fact that
Everybody
he
thought
just
that.
yeah, the fact that
Everybody thought that. I
he
was
didn't
laughing
prep
my
you.
inside. I was laughing my ass off. I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world because
Absolutely.
no one really knew what he was up to, and I kind of kept that under my hat because I knew he was coming out with a flute record like years before he came out with it because he came into the thing like, hey, I'm coming out with a flute record, and I'm not rapping anymore, and like I'm nervous that people are gonna expect me to rap and they're gonna hate it, and so like I just thought it was so ironic that like no
Yeah.
one cared to ask like, hey man, we want you to rap. Are you still rapping? Like no one, they just kind of assumed,
Yeah,
that he
like
came
they
in there
like
like,
just the same way people call you to do drum sessions.
right,
They just call you. They don't
right.
ask you specifically for drums,
Hey,
I'm
you still
assuming.
playing drums? Like if I
Yeah.
came in there with like a saxophone, like no, I'm not really doing drums anymore. I'm playing these saxes now, man. It'd be kind of odd, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but it was
I
funny in a way, but also very unique, I think, to Andre 3000 and where he's at in his life right now, where like it's like, man, I'm gonna come and bring what I got, man. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Like no stress. Like like I don't have to like send word and like have any sort of preconceptions about what's inside of me. I got this new thing inside of me, and if you want to fuck with it, you can fuck with it. And if you don't, that's cool too. Like that's all good. I don't know if this is viable or anything that anybody wants to hear, but if you want to go and dance with me on this sort of outer portion of the universe, which is like undiscovered, come dance. And we're like, well, shit, we're used to dancing on the outer portion of the universe, man. Let's make something new. Fuck it.
I think it
you
really
know?
speaks to the musicianship as well. Not I mean beyond just the creativity that you all share, but just being able to set up and play something. Like, I mean, you and the West Coast Get Down can do that because you have decades of just play, you
Yeah,
vibe off of each other, you know where you're gonna go. And even when you say, do the fifth thing you think of, you probably know uh, in general strokes where that is. But
kind
to
of.
bring
But
someone brand new in and be able to do that is astounding.
yeah, I mean, it does come from a lot of years and years of playing with the same cats and kind of knowing their musical thing. But also, we also all have kind of like, at least most of us have this kind of thing. It's like, man, we're meant to play. This is what we do. So
Hmm.
like, man, if you got a drum set there, like, hey man, play some drums. Like, okay, give me the sticks, I'll play. You want to play? Let's play. This is what I do. Like, I take this fucking serious, man. Like, this ain't no joke to me, dude. Like, you want to play? Let's fucking play. Like, I don't, and you could tell me the most strangest shit in the world to play, and I'm gonna try my damnedest to play it because this is what I was put on the world to do. I wasn't put on the world to do anything else, man. I was put on the world to play music, and play drums, and engineer and produce and write music, man. I wasn't here to paint a house or do any of that shit. Like, I'm serious about this, and a lot of us in our collective are serious about this. This is like life or death, man. So Andre 3000 comes in here and he didn't want to spit vocals, and he brings some wooden flutes. He's like, "Hey, man, this is what I got. You want to play? Fuck yeah, I want to play. Let's figure this shit out. You know? Yeah, let's make something new. Like, hell yeah, finally. Like it's like a challenge that like you know, for shit, 40, almost 43 years, like I've been challenging myself every day. Every time I sit on the kit, every time I pick up a pair of drumsticks, I've been challenging myself. So I'm not afraid of a challenge. I'm not afraid. Fear doesn't enter my mind. It's almost more exciting to do something challenging, do something that's different and new, even if at first it sounds whack or like doesn't make any sense. Like to go through a journey where you push yourself to do something different that may feel uncomfortable is kind of where I that's what keeps me inspired to play music.
Absolutely. Fearless Movement. How does writing with Kamasi work? Because I know that you guys wrote it over the 2 years or so, and the first five songs were kind of brought in, but does he write the heads and the structures and then just allow for you to improvise as a band? How does that work?
Well, sometimes for the songs that are written by Kamasi, he, writes the melodies home and he comes up with like a harmony and a melody that's kind of somewhat worked out. And maybe um, for this record, he had sort of a basic idea of what he wanted the rhythmic structure to be. Um, he definitely guides most of it, but so, sometimes he tries to overproduce it or sometimes he tries to come up with so many, like some ideas. And sometimes like, man, shut up. Let's just play the damn song the way we're feeling it. And that's going to be the tape. Like you're overthinking this shit. Yeah, this might be a new song, but you the same Kamasi, and that's the same Brandon over there. Like he knows what he needs to do. I know what I need to do. Let's just do it. But a lot of these songs that weren't written by Kamasi, or at least like the original portion of it wasn't written, were brought in like by Ryan, um, brought in by Brandon. Brandon's this dates back to like the piano bar days, so where we just bring in new material. Like, hey dudes, let's try this new stuff. And so we're just also very keen and very comfortable trying new material and trying to figure out how we're going to play this. Piano bar would be, like it would be like, yo, man, we don't want to play the same song the same way every night, or like the next time we play a song, I don't want to play it the same way, or I don't really want to play a song for another fucking month. Like, let's bring in new stuff. So we have a whole like duffel bag full of all of our charts that we've been playing since we've been playing the piano bar, and it's like something like 1,000 pages full of stuff. Yeah. So we're very used to seeing new material. So Ryan would have a song that's like he has like a little demo of like something he played on a keyboard or something, or in a scoring application or something, and it'd be very basic, and then we just sit down and play it, and then talk about it, and play it again, and then some of the stuff we didn't really have to talk about, and we did it in one take, and some of it sounded like shit, and we'd have to like talk about it a little bit. Dante Winslow came in with a song, but that didn't make this record, might make another record later on. Um, a bunch of cats came in with stuff, and we basically just workshop it like you would any song, like almost like in like the sort of Motown days. Someone would bring in a song for a particular artist, and like the rhythm section would sit there and workshop it for well, Motown like in 15 minutes, and then cut that sucker. But luckily we had a little bit more time. We'd workshop it for like maybe an hour, and then we'd cut. Like, all right, that's enough talk. Let's go in there and cut it. See if our ideas are good. Go listen back to it. If it sounded awesome, all right, next song. If it didn't, then we talk a little bit more about it and try to figure out like how to make the song. So it really is kind of a group effort, and everybody kind of has input to how we're approaching the song, and what sort of aesthetic we're trying to capture for that song. And then Kamasi definitely helps guides most of the stuff. It's his record, and then we record all of the rhythm section stuff and all of the horn section stuff, and then we usually do overdubs afterwards. Like we overdub any vocal stuff and percussion stuff, and any of the guest artist stuff we overdub. So Kamasi will take like the main core band, we'll record all that, and then he'll sit with it, think about like what else can I put on this. For this record, he didn't put the full choir and string section on it. He kind of went a different route, and kind of reached out to other artists to see if they could guest on there. We had some really great guests, BJ Chicago Kid, the two MCs from that were on Asha, Taj, and their last name's Austin. Those guys were incredible. You know, George Clinton, D Smoke, of course, Terrorist and Thundercat. And then we did the cover for Computer Love, which was really cool, and DJ Battlecat was on that, and he played the actual talk box on it, like Roger Troutman, straight up talk box thing, and like we got that sound, and he's like for him, he like did like a study of how Roger Troutman like played that instrument because it's not like a vocoder where you just sing into a microphone and play something on the keys. Like you have to put this like straw in your mouth and like it's basically hooked up to a speaker. So it's almost like there's a speaker in your mouth and you're using the shape of your mouth to sort of change the filter of what other synthesizer is coming out of that speaker, right? So when you go ooh ah ya, that's like it's like like if you ever like sing into a fan and like the air is going into your mouth and you go
Mm,
wow, and you can sort of like change the
yeah.
tonality of the sound. That's exactly what a talk box is. It's different than a vocoder. So it's basically like this speaker that's hooked up to a straw, and you put the straw in your mouth, and you try to talk, and whatever you're playing, guitar, synthesizer, whatever it is, it kind of sounds like that instrument is talking. But it's really difficult to play because imagine putting a straw in your mouth, man. I tried it once, and just because I was like, man, this is a really cool sound that no one uses very much. Like we should try to bring it back. And I tried it. It sounded like I had a speech impediment because like it's really hard to talk or with your thing in your mouth, and it doesn't do anything for any of the consonants like the t and the and the ch sounds. So you have to over enunciate those consonants while you're also like changing the shape of your mouth to get these vowels in there. It's a fucking complicated situation, and BattleCat has mastered it. So when we decided to do Computer Love, we're like, man, we gotta get Cat in here to put that talk box on it, man. And he's also a LA legend that worked with Snoop Dogg and a lot of he's like basically the West Coast hip hop sound, gangster rap sound is all Battle Cat, man. That's all his stuff, dude. Look him up.
Oh, I did.
He's
I did.
yeah, he's like one of the originators, man. Triple OG. And I've known him since I was a kid too. So that he fucks with us. Like he'll get on them turntables and play a song in 7/8 with us, man. Like it wasn't nothing. So when it came to making this last record, we're like, man, we got to get Cat on this. And then when the record was out, we're like, man, what would it be like if like Battle Cat toured with us, man, and like played his turntables in that talk box and like percussion on stage with us? Like that'd be pretty awesome. And we asked him, he's like, hell yeah, I want to come out with you guys, man. This will be fun. I quit touring like 20 years ago, man. That's the first time I've been on tour in a while, and it was amazing. You saw, I think the second show that we played of this new material.
Something like that. It was pretty early. Yeah. It
Yeah, it's like,
was incredible.
yeah, and we just finished the first leg. I just got home like a few days ago, and it's been, it's new material, and it's a new sort of way of looking at how we play live, and definitely having a DJ that's like plays his turntables like a jazz musician instead of like a standard DJ. It's like a superpower. There's not a lot of DJs that can play like that. I know only two, other than Battlecat. And Battlecat's here on the West Coast. He's homegrown, so of course he's part of our collective, man. Of course
Yeah.
he's inspired by the same stuff we're inspired.
The record has a definite hip hop influence to it that's I mean, always been a big element with the West Coast get down sound.
Yeah,
Especially like with Thundercats music, right? But and the collaborations you guys have done, but I think this was the most overt hip hop direction that Kamasi and you guys have taken. Uh, what challenges did this pose when making the record?
not much at all. I don't think it was a conscious decision.
Not,
Um,
not much. Easy
no, because
peasy.
like I've said, like hip hop and jazz here in LA have always been a fixture together.
Yeah.
Kamasi tour with Snoop Dogg, man. Like how can you not be inspired by that? Being in Snoop Dogg's band for
Hmm.
3 years. Terrace was in Snoop Dogg's band too. And like I said in Lamar Park, man, we would have MCs come up and sit in with us all the time. So we never really saw those two musics as being separate. It always seemed to creep in. And like if you try to play backbeat in New York over some jazz standard, they'd laugh you out the room. They go, get the fuck out of here. But here in LA, it was like, yeah, I can flow over that. Yeah, let me flow over that. So I think I think naturally, without even talking about it, to kind of revitalize jazz and move it into like this sort of accessibility where it was accessible to young people again. Um, we kind of naturally fell into sort of more hip hop type aesthetics and hip hop sort of rhythm structures, without going full, boom boom bap or like playing the same chords, or being simplistic in that sort of instrumental structure. We definitely use the energy and sort of the rhythms of that often, not just in this last record, but like when we play naturally, even on the last few tours we've been on. So I think it was just a natural progression that no one really discussed. It wasn't like, oh, we want to make a record that's more simple that people could dance to. It was just kind of the vibe we were in at that time, you know?
No, I think it's very organic. It never feels forced in the music.
Right.
It feels like it's just always been there, and it's just this time it's a little more forward in it.
Yeah.
I mean, on the idea of dance music, in the press kit, Kamasi did speak about being influenced by the idea of a ballet and how this record was supposed to be some form of connection between the creative spirit and the body.
Uh-huh.
How much did that idea weigh into the writing and the recording?
Well, I don't know how much I can comment on that because Kamasi is definitely has something he's working on to sort of
Oh,
further that thing. So that's going to be no comment.
okay, that's fair.
But
That's fair.
it's definitely part of a larger project that he's working on that we're eventually going to work on, of incorporating movement and that's really all I could say.
I am so
Kamasi's
curious already.
yeah, Kamasi's
You don't have to go
yeah,
further. You've
Kamasi's
that's
a real visionary. Um,
absolutely.
we kind of our personalities balance each other in that way. Like, I'm very technical and like engineer and know how to use computers and stuff and proficient in that realm. And Kamasi is sort of like a dreamer, like he's really good with like coming up with ideas and not letting any doubts like tell him no. Like, you can't do that. That's impossible. Of course, I can put choir and strings on this record that Thundercat's playing this blazing solo on. Why wouldn't I? Like figure it out. Tell me how to record all this shit at the same time. So he has a lot of grandiose ideas that are exciting, and I think anytime we do anything that 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 he sets up, it's always part of some bigger scope and some bigger plan. Uh, the epic was based off one of the songs on the epic was based off of a dream Kamasi had. And he had built this whole story, changing the guard, this whole like novel story of the. He never released it, but he had built this whole novel story that was sort of like the inspiration for all those songs. Um, so it's he always has like this like I don't want to say cerebral, like this sort of like almost fantasy, not fantasy, but like very like I don't know, like uh creative mind that like builds all these like ideas and universes and when you hear the music, you can definitely interpret it however which way you want, but the ideas that are going into it are so much larger and so much more vast than what we could explain with music. Like for him, it's part of a whole world. It's part of a whole uh, like mantra of inspiration.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, Seeing as we're making the connection back to the epic, that was such an ambitious project, right? Nobody does a 3 disc debut album. Um, and not stylistically, but just in terms of quantity. Fearless Movement is a much more contained album. Was that a more conscious decision? Like, let's challenge ourselves within a shorter context, or is there just like a wealth of material that was recorded, was written, and is just sitting aside for something else?
Same. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we recorded this on the record. We recorded about 3 records worth of material,
I don't
and
know
this.
why that's surprising at this point, but wow.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like I said, when we did the epic, I mean, exponentially, like, yeah, the epic was a 3 disc, 3 LP record but like that was still only like 30% of the songs we recorded for Kamasi. And a lot of that we had to like edit down just so it could fit on the medium, you know. And luckily, Flying Lotus is like, hey man, Kamasi's like, I want to put all these songs on the record, and Flying was like, we can't, like, you got to like cut it down a little bit. So they went back and forth a lot, and like the songs you that are on there are, it's like that's Kamasi's best effort, like cutting back everything that he wanted to release. Um, with more experience and like sales and like putting more business mind to it, I think had he done it again, he probably would have released three separate records, to sort of keep the press moving and to keep momentum. So I think going into this recording process, he was more open to like making the albums a little bit shorter, but then releasing them more frequently. So there's going to be more
That's
stuff coming
that's also
down the line.
very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Of this batch of Fearless Movement, do you have a favorite song on the album?
I have um, two favorite songs. I have the Andre 3000 song, which just because of the story and like the way that was made is kind of like my favorite, just because of the connection to it. And then I kind of like uh, Asha, um, was it Asha the Fifth? Sorry, I shouldn't be.
Asha the First. Asha the First.
Asha the
Yeah.
First. That's right. Excuse me.
I would
I kind of like
also
that song because I don't know if you know the history of that song. Kamasi has a 3-year-old daughter, and she would play on the piano and just start dabbling on the piano, and not with any sort of care. And then she kind of realized that like, hey, like when I hit this thing, it's the same note, and like started putting together like this melody. And she finally like kind of solidified it, and Kamasi like recorded it on his phone and like wrote a whole song to it. So I thought that was pretty neat.
that
And
one's one of my favorites, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the way that we approached it, and after getting some of those guests on there, Thundercat on there, I think it really came out to be a really badass song. So those are probably my two favorite songs.
Nice. Um, so as I mentioned, I caught you guys at History in Toronto just a few
Right,
weeks ago.
right.
Um, one of the greatest musical experiences I've seen, your performance in particular, one of the greatest displays of drumming I've seen. Um, Super impressed that you guys played almost the entirety of the new album. And
Yeah,
there was no older material, like the confidence that there is in that work, the desire to play new material. It was that in itself made it such a cool experience. That being said, how much does each show differ? Because I get
well,
the sense that if you're playing all of the new songs or most of the new songs at the show, I'd assume that most nights the set is the same, but the way that you approach each song each night is incredibly different.
yeah. This tour is a little bit different than most of the tours we go on or most of the shows that we do, where usually we wouldn't play the same set list every night. We play different songs and still keeping with that idea, trying to play the song and approach the song in some new aspect, like play it a different way that we've never played it before. And this particular tour, even though we're playing pretty much the same set list as the record, only new material, we still try to come from that sort of jumping point. Even though some of these songs only start a certain way, we still try to push them to like their limits. And this is all new material for us. Besides cutting in at the studio, it's definitely new material performing in front of people. And some stuff you did in the studio doesn't work in front of people. And so there's always an openness to like expand the song or go into this instead of going into that. Or, we definitely throughout the songs like quote other songs and, you know, uh, uh, sort of try to open them up so that it's not the same performance every night. It's jazz music, it's improvisational. So we
Hmm.
definitely are open to just straight up calling an audible and just changing directions within the song. That's been an aspect that we've always um, brought into the music. It's like, yeah, okay, this is your song, dude, but like, let's not play your song. Let's play something totally different. Why? Because why not? Like, challenge. Here's a challenge, motherfuckers. Play it like this. You know, and and everybody in the band's up to that challenge, including Patrice. You know, like we'll play a song sometimes. We starts in one tempo and starts in one meter, and it's a totally different meter and a totally different tempo, or maybe even a different key. And Patrice got to come in with her vocal, and she's got to, and like she matches it perfectly. So having that level of flexibility always leaves open sort of a level of you know changing the music somehow, which it makes it exciting, it makes it less monotonous.
I mean, aside from the fact that it's jazz, there was nothing that I was listening to it that I was like, oh, this is like they changed it up. That it still felt incredibly together, cohesive.
Yeah,
The giveaway to me was that you guys would be watching each other, and at any given moment, someone would smile like, "Oh, okay, this is what we're doing," or like I'd look over at Kamasi and he'd be watching you, and there'd almost be this look of like surprise, like, "Whoa, what?" And it was like that in itself made it so much more engaging to be like, "Oh, wow, that was a change that
right.
wasn't worked out." It was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, some of the time, like it's almost best not to work it out, so that you do get those surprising moments, and that you know that sort of boundless experimentation, where you make a happy mistake that was unexpected, but like it did something to the music that like could have only happened in that moment, and it's not going to happen ever again. So like we're not just up there playing for the audience, we're playing for ourselves too. Like we have to connect with each other because that's what this music demands. I'm not there playing a part. I got a drum chart up there, or like yeah, some of the guys have a chart up there just for the notes, but that's not necessarily a strict order as to what they should play. um we're trying to like impress each other too, and like not maybe just impress is the wrong word. We're trying to inspire each other too. This is jazz music, it's improvisational, so it has to be inspiring in order for you to connect to your artistic core and like come up with something. And if you don't feel mm, alive creatively, then you're not going to really play with much passion. And I think everybody on that stage is definitely very passionate about how they play and is passionate about how they connect to music. And we try to utilize that in the way that we approach the songs to keep that passion going, do new stuff, and, you know, excite, some of the guys in the band. Oh, you didn't think that was coming? Bam! You know, I'm like, oh, we're gonna play this now. Dope. So it's those happy moments that kind of inspire everybody in the band to like uplift. You know.
Cool. You've mentioned Tony Williams as one of your influences, and you've mentioned your reluctancy to put labels on genres. How would you describe your style as a drummer, but also what you do with Kamasi and the West Coast Get Down?
I mean, my style as a drummer is I'm not a drummer. I'm a musician. I went to music school. I learned everything about music. I just happen to play drums really well, better than any other instrument. I play piano. I play guitar. I play bass. I can even, you know, barely play a few melodies on a saxophone. Um, so I always try to have a very musical approach to drumming, where I don't really see my drums as like things you just hit. I see them as like a musical instrument, and the different drums and cymbals and things there are like kind of like notes. Maybe not be like a physical note, like a flat or an F sharp or something like that, but they're like textures. They're like notes, like textures. They evoke a feeling. They evoke a color or like an ambiance. And when I hear drums, that's what I hear. Like I don't hear. That's why I kind of like Tony Williams at first, because I didn't hear drum set player. I heard like what if John Coltrane played what he played on his saxophone on the drums? Like it was kind of sound what like Tony Williams is doing. Like you could hear like a bebop horn player's like solo part and like his drum patterns. And that's kind of where that's where I try to come from, no matter what style of music I'm playing. And I play a bunch of different styles of music, not just jazz. Um, I try to play it more like a musician, more like a producer than more like a drummer, and try to connect to the music using the drums as the same way as a piano player would or a saxophone player would. And I think Kamasi's music, although we are calling it jazz, is it's just I guess it's just improv music that's like modernized but not corny. Like it's
That's
not like some half
that's
effort to like revitalize jazz, which there's plenty of efforts that have been like that and they've just been super corny. Uh,
that's the perfect description right there. Absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, beyond like putting it in a sort of strict category that could be, you know, used for promotion, that's kind of where I see it. And I don't like, I think not putting necessarily too strict of a labels on things isn't like something that like I'm conservative about. It's more or less leaving it open to where it could be seen as anything. You know, like it doesn't have to have this strict label with all these rules associated to it. Like it can grow. It's you know, especially nowadays, like we're so open to like the idea of people changing when they get older, or as they grow throughout their life, changing and being creating a world that is welcoming of those changes. Oh, why can't music be the same thing? And I think artistically, artists change, and just like regular humans change, and creating a project where that change can be fostered but still be appreciated, I think is more or less where we're all coming from.
I think that really carries through like the songwriting, the recording, and the live performance.
Yeah.
All of that. Um, my closing question that I give to all artists that join me, what are your three desert island records?
Let's see. I'm gonna say this is somewhat controversial, but I'm gonna say Kenny Garrett, either Pursuance or Trilogy, um, depending on what day it is that I'm on the desert island and what record I go for that day. I'm gonna say the live concert of, even though Wayne Shorter's on it, the live concert of Miles Davis Quintet with four and more, and um, uh, I remember the rest of the name, but it was like a 3 disc thing. Uh, I'll listen to that every day and still find new stuff in it. And then ah, I'm gonna say Mahavishnu Orchestra Intermounting Flame. Um,
Interesting.
for stuff that's like a little bit more modern. Um, I probably would want to balance it up with like something like Rachmaninoff or like Stravinsky. Um, but if it's like a record that you can go to the store right now, buy or some Debussy. Actually, I think I would be cool with like
Okay.
listening to a record full of Debussy's greatest hits. But sort of in the sort of jazz fusion realm, those would be sort of my three sort of jumping off points.
All
Desert
right.
Art
I
records.
like them. I like them. I'm gonna have to check out some of those. Um, I think I'm familiar with the Miles Davis one that you were talking about.
It's or I'm gonna tell you right now. It's it's a My Funny Valentine plus four and more. It's a
Okay, yeah,
concert
yeah, yeah.
series they did in '64 for a benefit concert, and Miles didn't tell the guys that it was a benefit concert and they weren't getting paid until right before they went on stage, and they played like that. And man, it's it's ridiculous. That's like the first record I heard Tony Williams like really play on, even though he played on plenty of records before. That was like the first record I connected to, and I'm still finding not just in his playing, but like in Herbie's playing and Miles is playing, and Ron's playing. I'm still finding gems till this day. how they just did that was a live record within the studio, you know. So
Cool. I'm gonna check that one out.
yeah,
Well, revisit, I should say.
yeah,
Uh, Tony, thank you very much for your time. This was
my
a
pleasure.
fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
Uh, Thank you very much.
All right, man. Pleasure talking to you, dude.
Yeah.
All right. Later.
Later. Thank you for tuning in for my conversation with Tony Austin. You can catch Tony on the road throughout the year, performing alongside Kamasi Washington on the remaining North American dates of their tour, and later in the year, the band will hit up Europe. Fearless Movement, a true odyssey of post genre musical exploration, is available everywhere on all streaming platforms. In 2 weeks, I will be joined by musicologist, professor, and producer Rob Bowman to discuss 2 new documentaries: Any Other Way, The Jackie Shane Story, and Stax, Soulville, USA. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.